The minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of October 2015 have been laid on the table for half an hour prior to this meeting. Can I take them as agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Everybody is here, so there can't be any apologies for absence. Are there any declarations of interest, please?
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Kevin Denis has declared a non-pecuniary interest in item 9 as the chairman and member of the Orfold Sports Council.
Thank you very much. Any others? No, thank you. Questions from members of the public? Mr. Stuart Edge of Farnham.
Okay, thanks. Will the Executive Member for Planning identify what steps have been or are being taken to assess, in the transport assessments and in other respects, the practicality of building 4,800 houses at Dunsfield Aerodrome in order to accommodate the additional houses needed above those identified when the housing consultation was carried out?
Thank you, Mr. Edge. 4,800 dwellings at Dunsfield Aerodrome was not considered as an option in the local plan. The transport assessments support the local plan and therefore do not cover the option of 4,800 at Dunsfield.
Mr. Hyman, please.
Thank you again, Leader. Leader, the Council's 2014 local plan consultation provided a table of data specifying the amount and location of new housing for each of the 4 proposed scenarios. And so hence we might reasonably expect that the draft spatial strategy before us would now state the amount and location of new housing actually being proposed. It can only be assumed that if the Executive wanted members to know what they're agreeing to, then you would have provided that information prior to the Comos meeting. Hence, in the absence of any numbers, locations and constraints, the Commerce meeting was little more than a predetermined farce, culminating in the Chairman's summary completely disrespecting members' views and proposing the very opposite to the position of the vast majority of Commerce members. I quote, "I would propose that we say to the Executive, let's go forward with the existing plans we have of 591 houses for 10 years, and during that period we will look again at Dunsfold Park. A 10-year review suggested would be the answer," as the Chairman's summarising. Now, it seems that Waverley is delaying consideration of Dunsfold for another decade without taking any account of the overriding constraints upon the rest of the borough, and to avoid a third local plan failure, it's necessary to query the soundness of such an approach in terms of process. Will members be given the opportunity to revise the spatial strategy after Christmas when presented with the vital and determining evidence in the forthcoming Mott MacDonald Transport and Natural England Habitats reports? Thank you, Leader.
Mr. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Hyman. Again, I think you're running ahead of yourself in that this is not a draft strategy, this is a directional strategy. And we are working to decide what the draft should be, having considered this emerging direction. So the purpose of today's report is to request the Executive agree a strategy to enable it to complete the necessary testing of the local plan against the policies of the National Planning Framework. The published timetable for the preparation of the local plan anticipates the Council will approve the plan for publication in April 2016. This will provide the opportunity for members to consider and debate the plan. The emerging plan will be informed by all the relevant evidence, including transport assessments, habitats regulations, other sustainability factors, and in fact all the other issues, the viability that are required in the NPPF. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Move on now. Item 5, the forward programme. Is everybody happy with what is in their section? Can we adopt the forward programme, please? Thank you. Budget management report and in-year budget review. Councillor White Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. Can I first address the general fund? The good news is that the net forecast underspend continues with no significant variances to draw out. There is a table on page 18 of the report and the explanations that follow it to explain the different variations. With regard to the council tax support scheme, paragraph 13, this scheme replaced council tax benefit 2 years ago and is reviewed annually. The scheme is successful, as been seen by the low value take-up of hardship funding, which is actively promoted. It is recommended that the scheme remains unchanged for 2016-17. With regard to the general fund capital, pages 21 and 22, the programme has had a thorough review of progress on delivery, resulting in 2 recommendations to the executive to reschedule some projects to next year. Recommendations 3 and 4, and a recommendation to transfer between projects, which is recommendation 5. Approval is also requested to bring the employee record scanning project forward into this year's capital programme and funded from the urgent schemes funding, which is recommendation 2. Since the papers for tonight's meeting were prepared, an additional requirement has emerged. So can we please add the following paragraph to the report and note there will be an additional recommendation. So to insert para 26A, the existing roof to the Farnham Leisure Centre is the original roof, and the covering was overlaid 15 years ago to extend its life. Recently, there has been several areas where water ingress has occurred, causing damage to the internal fabric of the building, and the situation has worsened in the last few weeks. The Council commissioned a conditioning survey of the roof, and the recommended option is to overlay the existing roof with a new roof, as this can be carried out safely and without affecting the running of the centre, therefore minimising disruption to customers and avoiding closure costs. It is imperative that this work is carried out as soon as possible. With regard to the other side of our business, the housing revenue account, pages 22 and 23 refer. The HRA is under pressure from costs on some voids. We believe, however, these will be contained within the overall maintenance budget. Good news for the HRA is that it will receive additional income from interest earned on Treasury management. HRA core capital, stock improvement and new build all have rescheduled project proposals to next year, and these are included in recommendations 6 to 8 respectively. And finally, the report includes a summary of the challenges within our financial strategy for the General Fund and HRA. Leader, there are 9 recommendations documented on page 4 of the agenda and page 27 of the report, plus there's that additional recommendation relating to the Farnham Leisure Centre roof. Recommendation 10, it is recommended that the Council approves a virement from the urgent capital schemes budget and savings in the General Fund capital programme to undertake urgent roof repairs works at Farnham Leisure Centre at an estimated cost of £106,000. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Members, Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Leader. Recommendation 10, I think this will cause the least disruption to current users and will be able to keep the centre open, and the sooner the work is carried out, the better to avoid further damage. And I'll support this recommendation. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, that's right. Anybody else, please? Thank you. Then agenda item 6. There are now 10 recommendations, the 9 on the agenda paper and the additional one. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item number 7 is Treasury Management, year-to-date activity 2015-16. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. This report gives an update on Treasury activity. The annexes show information on balances, returns, maturity and credit ratings. We are achieving an average of 0.76% on the investment portfolio by increasing investment in the 3 to 6 month market instead of holding things on call. Annex 5 shows the significant amount of HRA funds, but also the levels of expenditure on the housing capital programme. This shows that there is limited opportunity to make significant longer-term investments beyond 2 years. In addition, note the rates achievable for 2-year investments are only marginally more than for 1-year investments. And we don't get locked out of forecast increases in rates as base rates go up. There is one recommendation to note and endorse on page 4 of the agenda and page 38 of the report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any comments, please? I noted your remarks about base rates going up. That seems to slide back further and further. I thought it was meant to be by now, and now I think 2017 now. So that's, I don't think we're going to be locked out. So item number 7 on the agenda, there are 2 recommendations. Are they agreed? Agreed. Item number 8 is the setting of council tax base and business base for 2016-17. This always surprises me that we're asked to approve it because it's statutory and set by a government formula, so we don't have any choice, but it is on the paper. I don't know if you want to say anything, Councillor Ramsdale.
I will lead if that's okay. As you say, the business rates are statutory set, but the council tax base rate is a calculation we have to do. We've got a statutory duty to approve the council tax base by the 31st of January each year before approval of the council's budget for that year. The report explains the calculation assumptions on pages 46 and 47. Essentially, the number of residential properties in the borough across all council tax bands are translated into an equivalent number of Band D properties to estimate council tax income. The total net estimated council tax base for 2016-17 is 53,645.9 Band D equivalent properties, which is an increase in Band D equivalents of 823 properties from last year. Now that, if the council tax for the Band D is kept at the same level, would generate an additional £133,000 based on the 161.91, which has remained frozen for 6 years. I think I'll leave the report to stand on the business rates because, as you said, they're set externally. The leader, there's recommendation on page 5 of the agenda and on page 49 of the report.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll have noted on page 53, colleagues, that we collect just short of £37 million in business rate and keep just short of 1.5. So I think that that is well worth noting. Colleagues, any other comments, please? Agenda item 8, there are 2 recommendations. Are they agreed? Item 9 is the NNDR discretionary rate relief policy, which is set out on pages 55 to 64. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. The Council has the power to grant local discretionary discounts where it is in the interests of the council taxpayers generally. This policy details the criteria and process against which the Council will consider applications for discretionary rate relief. The policy is reviewed periodically to ensure that it complies with current legislation and the Council's priorities. All organisations currently receiving discretionary business rate relief were given a year's notice in March 2015 that the existing relief terminates with effect from 31st of March 2016, and they will need to reapply under the new policy guidelines. The Council's policy to grant discretionary rate relief is set out in paragraph 4, page 56. These categories of discretionary rate relief have proven to be effective and consistent for the Council to support businesses and employment in Waverley. Note these are in addition to the mandatory reliefs. It is proposed that the policy for the period 2016-17 to 2019-20 remains the same as the current policy. Leader, there are 5 recommendations to support this on page 5 and 6 of the agenda and page 58 of the report. Except please note that there's a typo in recommendation 5, which is the last one, and the last few words should read, "into the interests of all Waverley's council taxpayers," inserting the word council. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, any comments, please? There are 5 recommendations on agenda item 9. Are they agreed? Agreed. Item 10 is outstanding debts write-off for decision. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you again, Leader. The purpose of this report is to obtain approval for irrecoverable bad debts of more than £7,500 each to be written off in accordance with the Council's financial regulations. Write-offs were last reported to the Executive in September 2014. This report requests the Executive to approve the write-off of 8 business rate debts totalling £133,931.01 and 1 case of former tenant arrears with a value of £8,870.47, as detailed in the exempt annex. In arriving at a recommendation to write off a debt, officers pursue a rigorous testing process to establish whether funds can be recovered or, as a last resort, whether the debt is to be deemed to be irrecoverable. Every effort is made to trace debtors and recover amounts, but some debtors become insolvent and some debts become uneconomical to pursue further. The Council maintains a provision for write-offs in respect of council tax and sundry debt invoices. This provision meets with the audit requirements and is subject to annual review. The write-offs detailed in this report are within the normal annual allowances for such items. Therefore, the amounts reported are within Waverley's budgets. It is recommended that under Regulation D203, the Executive approve the debts put forward for write-offs as listed in the exempt annex to this report. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. And colleagues, you'll see the listed write-offs and the reasons on the exempt annex on page 69. Any comments, please? Councillor King.
Thank you very much, Leader. I'd just like to comment on the fact that we have only one former tenant arrears on the list this time, rather than several which we've had in the past. This is down largely to the extremely good work of our Housing Department rents team, and I'd like to thank them for the hard work that they've done in achieving this. Hopefully next time there won't be any there.
Thank you very much. Yes, that's very good. Well done. Any other comments, please? Then item number 10, that is one recommendation. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item number 11, the Waverley Borough Council Emerging Spatial Strategy. I have a number of speakers that I've put their names down to speak, so I shall call them first. The speakers, I remind you, you have 4 minutes. We'll just set the machine, and please ensure that you've finished by the end of the 4 minutes, because there are members from 3 different groups and we need to be absolutely fair with everybody, so 4 minutes you'll be asked to stop. First, Councillor Andy MacLeod.
Thank you, Leader. I attended the ONS committee not as a member of the committee but in order to speak, and in many ways it was a useful and interesting meeting. 6 councillors, including 3 people who weren't on the committee, spoke strongly in favour of development at Dunsfold, and 5 councillors, including 2 who weren't on the committee, spoke strongly against. A lot of good points came out of this discussion, but unfortunately very few of them have made them to the list that has been put before the Executive. That list consists mainly of fairly obvious points that I'm sure no one would disagree with and won't help you in assessing the emerging spatial strategy. So unfortunately, I'm afraid that on this occasion the actual ONS procedure has failed. Moving on to the emerging strategy itself, to my mind it's a rather disappointing document after something like 2 years of work from 2013. What it tells us is that the number of houses, the housing need has increased by 1,411 from 8,450 to 9,861. But there's no real explanation given of why this is the case. I think councillors and members of the public deserve an explanation, because this housing need number keeps moving around in a rather odd way. At the time of the South East Plan, it was stated to be 250. At the time of the last Waverley Plan, it was stated to be 711. It then became 470, and it's now 519. And I think this needs to be explained, and it needs to be an explanation to the public of why the number is 519. I'm not disputing, by the way, that we should not accept the number. I accept Matthew Evans' view that if we don't accept the number, we'd almost certainly fail the local strategy. But I do think it needs to be explained. Secondly, it needs to be explained why the actual planning period has moved up from 18 to 19 years. That isn't explained either. But that is actually responsible for 519 of the additional number. Another thing that's changed significantly is that we seem to now be talking about a shortfall. When we did the public consultation, there was no mention of a shortfall, but in this document we talk at one point about 6,000 shortfall, then 3,000, then 1,200. And this I think will be pretty confusing to the members of the public. I'd like to comment briefly on the comments made about the public consultation. The actual number was 4,300, I believe, who responded. A number of that size is more than adequate to predict the result of tens of millions of people voting in the general election. So I'm not sure why it's said that it should be discounted completely as representative of the views of something like 90,000 people in Waverley. 85% of the population voted for scenario 3 or scenario 4, and I think they need to be listened to. Running out of time as I am, I'll move on quickly to say that in terms of the effect on Farnham and Cranley of this new spatial strategy, it could be fairly disastrous. At the time of the public consultation, Farnham was due to get 45% of the housing. If you do a quick calculation, the new number would give us almost 50% of the housing. Cranley was due to have previously 29%. It's now going up to about 23%. Taking into account the number of housing around about Farnham that's going to take place with other boroughs, it's a completely unsustainable thing. I would like to circulate some of the numbers I've done to the executive later, but I'm running out of time, so I have to finish. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacLeod. Next, Councillor Jim Edwards.
Thank you, Leader and members. I wish to take this opportunity to express some of my concern regarding this item. As you are probably aware, a great deal of concern was expressed regarding this matter at the recent Community Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting, where I and fellow members were very concerned about a number of issues. I'd like to express the following concerns. One, we are, in my opinion, in great danger of failing to produce an acceptable plan in the time allowed. There are, to be fair, a number of reasons for this, but members wish to see a much more proactive role played by all concerned in getting the necessary work completed. The consultation with residents suggested by the planning inspector at the last local plan hearing confirmed that out of the 4 scenarios considered, the vast majority voted in favour of 3,400 homes to be built on Dunsfold Park. Yet, the officers are now proposing up to 1,800 homes. For reasons of soundness, we must therefore surely reconsult on this matter. Otherwise, the inspector will regard the figure proposed unsound. Now, if we do reconsult and the residents turn it down, it puts us back quite some considerable time. Number 3, there is much comment about the traffic assessment, and we await this with great interest. However, it must be remembered that planning applications cannot be refused on congestion grounds, but can be refused on air quality issues. Fourthly, designations are what makes Waverley such a beautiful place to live. On top of this, we have 2 special protected areas which require SANG provision. These do not seem to be forthcoming, even though we have employed an officer to address the situation. Therefore, we must concentrate officers' minds on the need to maximise our brownfield sites before all else. 5. In the latest spending review, the government has increased even more the need to have a viable plan in place. They are doing this by imposing a delivery test against the numbers identified in the local plan. There are also other measures announced affecting what we will be able to do regarding planning matters. To sum up, I would ask the Executive to agree under the chairmanship of the portfolio holder the immediate setting up of a planning special interest group to help drive forward the local plan, consisting of members from across the borough to help deliver the plan in a timely manner. I would also ask the portfolio holder to give all members a fortnightly update as to the plan's progress, including datelines, etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Leader. I've really got one point I want to focus on here, and that is the housing needs number of 519. I think it's important, recognising that this is a directional strategy, which has been mentioned, I think, at least once tonight. The validity of this number, whether this number is sound for Waverley, whether it reflects actual need, whether that in itself is being reviewed and assessed. I also share the comments that were raised earlier about having an explanation of the 519, how it's moved from previous numbers to the one it is. I'm sure that Waverley housing needs, in part, is impacted by the effect from London people wanting to move out. Now, how much of that is key in coming to the assessment of 519? How much further can we, what else can we do to actually review that number and perhaps assess it down? It's the point I wanted to make. I've made my other points on previous occasions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forozeski.
Thank you, Leader. I was really pleased to see this item come before Community ONS, but I was a little bit disappointed with its content, and I was also very disappointed at the lack of member involvement. I do really appreciate the enormous effort required and all the hard work the officers and the executive and members are putting into this. Nobody would dispute that. But it is the single biggest issue that faces all and has grave consequences if we get it wrong. I've got a number of comments. Please, none of them are meant to be critical, and they're just my comments and my observations. I've read in the papers that the local plans must be supported by sound evidence. Paul Wenham clearly described the requirement for evidence, automatic planning permission for brownfield sites, and the consequences if we don't deliver on the growth agenda. Powers removed by 2017 if we fail to produce a plan. I want to understand this process as a member. Sadly, I don't. And it's a plea because I want to. I want to feel I'm part of the process and not excluded. I've got no current evidence, I've got no updates, I have no briefings, I have no information. I can't make informed decisions or choices going forward on a local plan if we don't have regular updates, briefing and knowledge on what is about to shape the future of Waverley. It's minuted in a meeting with developers that Cranley should have its own mini plan. That's not a strategic approach to the borough or our cross boundaries. Come on, guys, we must be able to put together a 5-year housing land supply. We must be able to identify those that are available and deliverable. Let's start by looking at the pending applications that we already have in the system. We continue to ignore or find issue with Dunsfold Park. That's the only sustainable site that has evidence through the consultation process that showed it's favoured, and there is evidence to provide that because it is shown through the consultation responses. Objectively assessed housing need needs to be proportionate to where the need is. Right now, it's disproportionate and misleading to suggest that the people of Cranley want mass development. That is not what we are hearing, it's not what we are seeing. Matthew Evans again spoke eloquently about congestion and stated it's not a planning reason to refuse an application. But issues of safety are, and yet we have concerns about Dunsfold Park and the 281, yet we're not worried about the single file traffic roads in and out of Cranley, or the 1 in 9 heavy good vehicle movements every 9 minutes for the next 5 years, or the applications that are already in the permission, that already got permission, i.e. Amulets Lane and Horsham Road, and yet all of these go out onto the 281. Every single one of them goes out onto the 281. I don't think we've gone far enough to address the issues from the inspector. Horsham District Council has recently had its plan adopted. Maybe there's lessons there that we can learn from. It's perhaps worthwhile having a look to see how they got their plan through this time and adopted. We need to lead. I want to see Waverley lead. We're being led by developers right now because we don't have protection. I want a strong, robust plan that will stand the test. All members should be fully briefed regularly and more involved. And this is a fast-moving process, and the information already is beginning to become outdated. So I would reiterate what Councillor Edwards said, that I would really endorse and like the executive to consider that we have a SIG to look at this. The other thing I would like to suggest as well is, can we not look at a policy that helps protect us, gives us more involvement and helps scrutiny do what it's supposed to do and at its best? Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Councillor Jenny Alves.
Thank you. I have a very simple question. Regarding the development of our local plan, what level of input are we receiving from our critical friend? In general and in particular, what, if any, comments have been received regarding the disparity between what appears to be a reluctance to settle for housing development at Dunsfold and the results of the consultation, which were received in March of this year, supporting that? My question is, please, can we hear what we're hearing from our critical friend? I don't seem to have heard anything very much from that quarter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Councillor Williamson.
Thanks very much, Leader. I've no intention of repeating the well-made points that have been put forward by members both this evening and particularly at the Community Overview and Strategy meeting the other week. However, I have a number of questions that come directly from a review of the papers in front of us tonight. I did ask the first one of Emma earlier today. I mean, if you turn to page 72, item 1.2, it says that part of the work leading to completion of the plan was for the council to agree the preferred spatial strategy. Yet the recommendation is for this, for the executive to approve it. I mean, is it an executive decision? Is it the council decision, as indicated by the officer's report? The answer I was given, and it's the first time I've heard this, was that it was a direction of travel. And I've since heard that comment several times this evening now, which is interesting. I guess the obvious question that follows from that is, what's the status of this direction of travel? Where specifically in the procedures does the executive obtain an overriding authority in this way? My understanding was that all local plans and its documents had to be approved by the council. A significant number of members who I've spoken to over the last week or so have got far greater experience than I have in these matters, strongly believe that this third attempt at a local plan is heading the same way as the previous two attempts. Rejection by the inspector, and basically for the same reason. That evidence it depends upon was being made to fit a predetermined strategy. Could the leader please tell me how the spatial strategy paper that we've got in front of us again has been amended to reflect the genuine concerns raised by the councillors from across the borough, but specifically from Farnham and from Cranley? It looks to me as though no changes have been made, and I'm not sure from what I've heard that changes are being made. I'm also particularly disappointed, and I've got to say this, that some members found it amusing, the question from the public. It's not uncommon in industry. If something goes catastrophically wrong, which this would do, this would be an absolute disaster for Waverley, that those people responsible are either made to resign or volunteer to resign. I mean, a normal procedure I know in councils is for is to have a witch hunt after the event, and some poor officer or officers are nominated as scapegoats and lose their jobs consequently. I'd like to see the councillors who are driving this proposal in this direction have responsibility for it, stand up, take accountability in front of a full council, so that if it's rejected, they can immediately do the honourable thing and resign. This is the very least they could do in return some measure of integrity to this council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's the questions from councillors who are not members of the committee. I'll come to the portfolio holder in a moment, but I'll ask first Mr. Evans, can you explain, because it's come up 2 or 3 times, how we got to 519, and that it's not us that have got to 519, but so that members are aware how that has happened and how it is fixed.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, the figure of 519 dwellings per year is the figure in our strategic housing market assessment. That's a document which is on the website and explains in a lot of detail how that figure has come about. And its starting point is household projections from the government, and then that needs to be amended, affected by other local factors. There's very clear government guidance on how you undertake a housing market assessment. We followed that guidance. It's a very technical area, so we didn't do the work ourselves. We used consultants who are expert in this area. What we also did, and it's important to make the point, is that we didn't do it in isolation. We are part of the West Surrey strategic housing market area, so we did it in partnership with Woking and Guildford. And coming out of the whole process was a figure for Waverley, a figure for Woking, and a figure for Guildford. So it's a technical figure of objectively assessed needs. And the task for the council, and this was made very clear by the inspector, and it's set out very clearly in the MPPF, is that you then test that figure. You don't question the figure, because there's no... That wouldn't take us anywhere. You test that figure against policies in the MPPF, and that's the process which the council is undertaking at the moment. So hopefully that helps, Leader.
Thank you very much. Councillor Adams.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you for all of those members who have taken part in this discussion this evening. I think Matthew's laid out the framework to a certain extent. Yes, we are saddled with this number. It is our duty to leave no stone unturned to try to achieve it. How we achieve it is up to us to a certain extent, because obviously we are constrained in Waverley quite significantly. We've got significant landscape constraints, we've got significant flooding constraints, we've got constraints relating to infrastructure, mainly transport, which everybody is familiar with, but there's other infrastructure as well, like drains, and many of the infrastructure providers have already set their own timetables for 3 or 4 years ahead. So the whole exercise really is a question of keeping a whole series of cogs moving and trying to keep them moving together. It's quite clear, anybody looking at the map can see quite clearly that the main areas of which Waverley is able relatively easily to develop properties is in the southeast of the borough and the northwest of the borough. In the northwest we obviously have other constraints. There's the spa, for which we have to provide sangs. As we also obviously start with sites which are promoted to us. We can't go out and say, oh, like that bit of land, I think we'll build houses there, because the owner might just say, no, disappear. So we have to start with the sites that are promoted to us. And they're all ranked. There's been a significant exercise going on sustainability of all of those different sites. So having taken all those factors into account, we then have a look at the options that we have to put things forward. You talked about the 5-year supply. At present, the 5-year supply is about 400 houses short. We currently have now 6 major applications which are subject to appeal. If those 6 are approved by the inspectors, and the inspectors these days seem to be being told by the government also to look very favourably on appeals, then we will provide 660 additional houses, which will, in fact, then cover the 5-year supply. So our issue really begins after 5 years at the moment. And obviously Dunsfold Park, as everybody has recognised, is a potential major contributor to future housing in Waverley. It has been raised earlier, and I'll say it again. There are very major issues with the approach that Dunsfold Park are taking to putting forward their requests. At the moment, we're talking about 1,800 homes anticipated in their first application, a new entrance onto the A281, and possibly some additional commercial activity. Yes, I see Dunsfold Park as making a major contribution to Waverley, both financially and habitably, in the years to come. But it has to be done right, it has to be started correctly, and it has to fit in with everything else that we're trying to do. And at the moment, it is not a site which many people would opt to live in. Most people, as was identified in the ONS report, there's a mismatch. Most people would like to live where their relations and friends live, which is around the towns and villages elsewhere in Waverley. So again, that is a balancing factor that we have to take into account. I do take the point that we haven't really engaged perhaps as often as we should with members. I think the last one that we did was in July. I think that was it. It's 2 reasons for that, really. One is that it's a fairly fast-moving situation in some ways, in that we're still getting changes from the government relating to the rules that we have to apply. And in other ways, it's a slow-moving activity because it seems to be taking much longer than we initially anticipated to gather together all the evidence. Of course, if we actually could say now, oh, well, we'll deliver 519 houses for the next 20 years, then there's very little evidence to gather. We can just go ahead and say, here you are, Mr. Inspector, please approve this. He'd rubber stamp it, we'd be away. The fact of the matter is we're not in that position. And we're not likely to be in that position for some time. So we have to prove why we're not in that position. And that is both time-consuming and costly. So I take the point that I think there should be more member involvement, and I'll talk to the rest of my colleagues as to the best way that that can be achieved. Thank you very much, Leader.
Thank you. Just in response to Councillor Williamson and with regard to it being approved, no, this is not the strategy that is being talked about tonight. The clue is in the emerging word. This is the emerging strategy, and it does not tie council to anything. When a strategy comes forward, it will be put to the full council to decide and won't be decided by the executive. If you look on some of the pages, for instance, under Greenbelt, it gives 2 options. Well, it gives the benefits, and then it says that when consulted, 52% of those who responded were opposed to the changes. So it's not saying to go either way. This report is of what is emerging, and that is what we're being asked to do this evening, to let the emerging report go forward to make a full report that will go to council in due course. So no, the executive are not approving the strategy, just what is emerging here. I think also members said something about the numbers that were consulted on, but you will see if you look into the report that all the numbers at Dunsfold Park are being considered. The 1,800 and the 3,400 are mentioned on page 81. When it refers just to the 1,800 on the first page, that is their current application or expected application. So don't get confused by the numbers. All numbers are still in there, as you will see on page 81. Colleagues, any more, please? You can't come back, I'm sorry. The rules are quite clear. You can speak once, and that's all. Members of the Executive, please. Councillor Adams.
I would like to ask the Head of Service for Planning to correct some figures in Table 1 on page 80.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, this is Table 1, which is a table which we thought would be useful to form part of the report, which sets out dwellings completed since 2013 and outstanding planning permissions. Unfortunately, a couple of gremlins came into the some of the figures. So if I could just take you through them line by line. Farnham, the total figure is 558. Godalming, the total figure is 690. When it comes to Hazelmere, the outstanding planning permissions is 243. So that takes you to the bottom line, and the outstanding planning permissions for the whole of the borough is 1,704. But that does leave the total figure, I think the most important figure, 2,071, unchanged. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. I think that's well worth noting, members. 1,704 outstanding planning permissions, and when the government keeps saying it's local authorities that are holding the building up, and there's 1,704 outstanding, so that doesn't quite fit. Thank you, Councillor Potts.
Thank you, Leader. I welcome this report. We've got ever-changing rules and regulations that seem to be hitting us from the government. Councillor Adams has said and made clear tonight that this really is an emerging strategy, and I think we need to be really clear on that. We have a lot of uncertainties at present. Dunsfold Park is one, and highways are another, especially plans that we understand are possibly in place much longer term for areas such as the A3, which again will hugely impact our borough. And we need a robust local plan, and we need it in place sooner rather than later. So I think that we need to look very carefully at submitting a 10-year plan. But I think we need to be clear that a lot of the evidence we currently have and are working to does indicate that Dunsfold can accommodate the planning application that we're expecting, potentially 1,800 homes as being sustainable. And one of the main constraints that we've seen time and time again, and especially from the inspector's report previously, is all around the 281 and highways. But let's not forget that we actually haven't got all the evidence that we need, and it's evidence that we have to have when we appear before an inspector, and it's evidence that we have to actually get this plan through and get this plan adopted. And we need to see all the evidence from Mott MacDonald, who are our traffic consultants, and we need to work with them and Surrey Highways. And we should not and cannot rule out any site within the borough, and that includes Dunsfold Park. Now, I know what I'm saying isn't going to be popular with everybody, but I think at the moment we need to be very clear. We don't have all the travel assessments that we need, and until we've got those, we cannot adopt and we cannot move finally forward with our local plan. And I think we need to be very conscious that we need all of that evidence, and we need to continually have that check step in place. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Councillor Denis.
Thank
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the first speaker, Mr. Charles Orange, when he spoke, and I do accept this is a statutory requirement for this document in due course, so I do accept that. And it's really to support what Mr. Orange said. I mean, I am concerned. We keep getting told 80% supported the Dunsfold Park. Well, that was 80% of 4% who responded, and my question has been and always will be of how many of those were actually people who live in the area. Because unfortunately, I continuously hear people from the other side of the borough say, let's put everything in Dunsfold, and I think the term is not in my backyard. I accept the comment, well, small numbers are an indication. I think one of the speakers talked about the general election where nobody expected a Conservative majority, so that didn't quite work. So it's fine to say it was supported, but it wasn't supported by the local residents whose lives, who the infrastructure will be affected, individuals and communities. Yes, it's very easy for people on the other side of the county or the borough to say, let's put everything in Dunsfold rather in their own backyard. So I think it's only fair. I'm here to represent my local community, and I know they feel very strongly that that consultation isn't a true reflection locally what is wanted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other members of the executive to speak? No. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. I find myself very much in agreement with what Councillor Potts had to say, so I'll avoid trying to repeat that, other than to add emphasis, I think, to the things she said about there's things we still need to find out. There's evidence that needs to emerge. I think it's the fact that there's emerging evidence that means that this document is an emerging document in the way it's taking us. And clearly there's a lot of debate to be had, recognising what Councillor Denis has said about views in his side of the borough, and I know there's other views from other parts of the borough. Many of the questions, observations I've heard from I'll call it the row behind me, or the two rows behind me, I know have been raised at discussions amongst the executive. So I'm absolutely in support of what Councillor Adams said about trying to increase member involvement and keep people up to date. He almost shocked me when he said it was July when we last had that big open discussion. It doesn't seem that long ago. I guess that's because I'm knocked out trying to do star chambers and things, and you're all sat there saying, when are you going to tell us more? When are you going to tell us more? So there must be a better balance for us to find, and it's that balance that I would like the exec to take on board. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. And I think what you've said, and certainly what Councillor Potts said, is correct. We must have the evidence. It's no good stumbling ahead without. We must have evidence, and it must be in place. And I know all members of the executive, and certainly I am, and the portfolio holder, are very frustrated about how slow it is, particularly the traffic reports, and we are in the hands of others. I think Councillor Potts mentioned the A3. There is a holding objection to a local plan from Highways England, and that's the position, because they object to any more traffic on the A3 as of today, unless they get more details of how they're going to keep it off, or whatever they expect us to do. So these things have to be brought forward in evidence. All the authorities, the water authorities and others. Thank you. Any more executive speakers? Thank you. Then item number 11, there was one recommendation. Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 12, the car park review 2015, response to consultation and review of of tariff structures. Tied up with traffic. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Leader. I'll give a break to my two colleagues who have been doing a lot of speaking tonight. Members will recall that the report on the 2015 review of car parking was considered at the meeting of the Executive on the 5th of October. At that meeting, members asked officers to undertake formal public consultation on the proposed reduction in the charging period, which would provide customers with an additional 30 minutes free parking each day. That public consultation has been completed. The 3 responses received are attached in Annex 4 to the report. All 3 were supportive, although 2 would have preferred a greater reduction in the charging period to give an additional 60 minutes free parking each day. When I presented the report on the 5th of October, I emphasised that properly considered management and charging arrangements were essential to positively manage our car parks and influence traffic movements and congestion in our town centres.
We can't have several people talking together. Thank you. Continue, please, Councillor Denis.
I also emphasised the need to be able to continue to reinvest in our car parks and the public realm generally to maintain and improve the environment for everyone. A further 30-minute reduction in the charging period would cost another £40,000 per annum and is not affordable at this present time. I would therefore recommend that the Council proceeds to make the order reducing the charging period by 30 minutes. The Executive also asked for a report back on progress with other recommendations in the review. The tariff structures have been reviewed and requested to reflect inflation since the last increases in 2012, but as a leader previously mentioned, some were updated back in 2008 and before. The proposed new tariff structures are set out in Annex 2 to the report to reflect this and are rounded to the nearest 10p. The comparisons with other local authorities are set out in Annex 1, demonstrate that the charges in Waverley remain comparative to those in neighbouring areas, and we still do not charge on Sunday where most others do locally. Season ticket charges have been revised to reflect inflations and are set out in Annex 3, rounded up to the nearest pound. The additional income will offset inflationary increases in the council's costs and enable it to further invest in the car parks and the public realm generally for the benefit of the community. Progress updates on the other recommendations from the 5th of October Executive are also set out in the report, and a further report will be presented to a future Executive meeting to advise further on progress with these. I therefore recommend members agree the reduction in charging by 30 minutes and to support the revised tariff structures and season ticket charges set out in Annex 2 and 3 to the report, which are shown as the two recommendations on page 88 and 89. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. A lot of work's gone into this. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Chairman. I broadly welcome this. A lot of these car parks haven't had their charges increased for 4 years and even greater or similar number possibly for 8 years. We have discussed matters with Chambers of Commerce in our 4 major settlements, and they had no great trouble with a small increase in the charges because they appreciated that there's a business case for it. I think the other point is that a lot of our car parks are extremely well used, and it's because the town centres they support have a good offering. I mean, Godalming this weekend, the people were queuing up to get into Crown Court car park and taking a long time to park because Godalming was absolutely chock-a-block. Now, it doesn't mean you price people out of it, but I think a small increase will help the turnaround of the car parks and make sure they're being properly used and used efficiently by people who want to go into Godalming to shop as opposed to people who want to go up to London or anything like that, or even workers. I mean, talking about workers, I mean, this is a difficulty we have in making available cheap car parking space for people who work in our town centres because we actually have a complete lack of car parking in many of our towns, certainly in Godalming. I mean, Mr. Wilde mentioned a car park at Mead Row. Now, the reason it had a £1.50 charge was that was brought in about 4 or 5 years ago with Waverley working with the Chamber of Commerce to make an inexpensive car park and not very well used car park available for workers who were working in Godalming to use and go into Godalming. Now, sadly, it's about a mile from Godalming town centre, and a lot of workers sadly didn't actually want to walk into Godalming and use the car park. So, in fact, it is now predominantly used by commuters, and I think it's quite right that we asked commuters to pay a little bit more money than £1.50 a day, whereas all the other car parks in Godalming and other places are probably more like £9 a day. So, I think overall, I think it's good. We've got to keep the vitality. If anyone has any land available for extra car parking, please let Kevin know, because I'm sure we could do with that knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yes, Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. I think, as you noted, this is a very difficult area. I'd particularly like to thank Councillor Kevin Denis and the team of officers led by Richard Homewood. I think this is unusual in the Council that it seems to have at least 4 pulls on it in terms of direction. We've got a desire that the prices are as low as possible for our residents, yet we want to ensure the spaces are available for people who are coming to shop, not people looking for cheap all-day parking. We want to ensure the quality, the safety of our car parks, but of course that means investment of capital and yet more money. And yet we are trying to not spend all of our money on, or at least make sure that the money collected in the car parks covers the costs of the car parking and it's not subsidised from elsewhere. So with those four pulls potentially pulling people in different directions, I think they've done a good job in pulling all this together, and I support them in what they've proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Leader. I too support this report and agree with what others on the executive have already said. I think the new car park tariff still offers good value for those coming into our towns, and as we can see from the table on pages 91 and 92, is broadly cheaper on the whole than our neighbouring authorities, and certainly significantly cheaper than Guildford just to the north. So I'm more than happy to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor King.
Thank you. I'd like to follow on from Councillor Reynolds' comment and thank Councillor Denis for not increasing by a large amount the season ticket costs for Mead Row. We've already discussed it. Although commuters do get in there, the local residents have very little parking and they make great use of that car park. I think a modest increase is fine. Otherwise, you'll have a lot of fuss from them because they really do suffer because of the station. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I think I'd like to echo the comments for the good work that's been done by the portfolio holder and the team. And I think when I check back through, some were as long ago as 2003, one or two that slipped through, but there we are. And when you do, as has been said, look at that comparison on page 91. You look at Waverley being quite inexpensive compared with others, and you look at our neighbours charging on the Sunday and we don't. Item number 12. Now, the recommendation should say the executive recommends to council. Those two, so taking that into account, two recommendations. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you. 13 is the review of polling stations, and this report sets out proposals for changes to polling stations for all elections from the 1st of January 2016. It's quite frightening, that's only a month away. To aim to minimise the use of schools wherever possible, as some schools find the use of polling stations to be disruptive. This means that officers are putting forward proposals to use alternatives to the local schools in Greyswood Village and Whitley. However, unfortunately, the only alternative for a temporary polling station at Farnham Castle Ward will be to return for a temporary period to using Potter's Gate School. The officers will also be starting preparatory work to begin an electoral review of Waverley Borough Council wards and approaching the Local Government Boundary Commission again following the Council's decision in February 2013 to request a boundary review for the borough wards. At that time, the Commission could not offer a practical timescale for the review. If the Council agrees to changes in boundaries, there is an extensive public consultation process which you'd hope to be completed in time for the next Borough Council elections in May 2019. Any comments, please? Thank you. That is item number 13 on the agenda. There are three recommendations. Are they agreed? Agreed. Item 14 is the Gambling Act 2015. The public consultation on the review of the Council's statement on gambling policy. The Council is required to undertake a 3-year review of the statement of gambling for Waverley, against which applications for licences under the 2005 Gambling Act are considered. A public consultation has taken place and no comments were received. The Licensing and Regulatory Committee have also considered the report and now commend it to the Executive for approval. Councillor Denis.
Having gone through this policy, I mean, this is mostly mandatory requirements to update our policy, so we are required to do it. There is a couple of typos in the document. one where it says cares, and I think it should say cafes, but that was discussed at some length. But these are mandatory requirements, so these are not niceties, it's what we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Subject to the typos being corrected. Item 14, there is one recommendation. Is that agreed? Agreed. 15, review of the housing-related support services for vulnerable adults in the Borough. Councillor King.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the Corporate ONS for their comments and support in this report. Our housing-related support services to vulnerable adults are currently delivered by a number of different teams within the housing service. Each team has a different remit, eligibility criteria, processes and procedures, and different performance measures. I don't think this is an efficient way of working, and I'm pleased to say a review was carried out. The consultant's report is there at Appendix 1, giving recommendations which recognise that a change to delivery of the service, maintaining the current staff establishment, would give better outcomes and opportunities for efficiencies. Recommendation is to bring together the existing teams as shown on page 136. This will establish an older person's housing service which would facilitate improved information sharing and joined up working with agreed service standards and efficient case management. And I can't emphasise enough, there is no change in our establishment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments? Councillor Denis.
Thank you. I think this is a really, really good bit of work, and I think if I had to summarise it, it gives us a bigger bang for our buck and a better service. So I think in financial terms, in performance and everything, I think this is absolutely spot on, and I know I certainly support this recommendation.
Thank you. One recommendation. Colleagues, is that agreed? Agreed. 16, the approval to submit a planning application, part of Village Green, Oxford Ridge. I think it's set out in the papers, but Councillor King.
Thank you very much. This is very straightforward. Site work has started on the site at Oxford Ridge, building the show houses, and to move forward we need to establish a site for the contractors, for their vehicles and their site office. This is a straightforward request, please, for planning permit, to put forward planning permission to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Colleagues, no. One recommendation, item 16, is that agreed? Agreed. 17 is the performance management report, quarter 2. This report gives an analysis of the Council's performance for the second quarter of 2015-16, July to September. Performance in this quarter has been good overall, particularly in the areas of planning and leisure. I would like to thank the Overview and Scrutiny Committees for their consideration of the performance report and their comments. It will be very pleasing to see that we are now almost right on target on the benefits, the time taken to deal with benefits, and that's excellent news. Colleagues, Councillor King.
Thank you very much. Page 170, we'll notice that the H2, average number of calendar days taken to re-let, is in the red category. Just as a brief update from the paper, we now have a voids officer in place, and I hope to see a significant improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Councillor Ramsdale.
Page 173, the two red stars against finance. Regarding benefits, just to reiterate, maybe you mentioned it then, I'm not sure. Yes, we were performing quite poorly at 34 and 13 days versus target of 20 and 9. But in October, the month after the quarter, we managed to bring that down to 21 and 9. So I think it shows a lot of effort and that the product's coming back to where it should be. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Colleagues, there is 2 recommendations to agenda item 17. Is those agreed? Item 18 is the Service Plan 6-month Progress Report. Service plans are devised each year to deliver the Council's corporate priorities. This report sets out the excellent progress that has been made in the first 6 months on delivering these plans. There were no observations from the ONS, community ONS. Comments from corporate ONS are set out in the separate observation paper that members will have received. and they have asked that the format of the 2016-17 service plans be reviewed to facilitate a more effective discussion at the joint ONS committee in January. Any comments, please? Thank you. No comments, thank you. Item number 18, there are two recommendations. Are they agreed? 19, building control establishment. I think, Mr. Evans, you're going to deal with that.
Thank you, Leader. Just very briefly, the purpose of the report is to agree a change in the building control establishment. The opportunity exists due to 2 vacant posts in the team at present. The recommendation is to create a new post and delete the 2 part-time posts. And this new post will support the integration of IT systems, allowing more flexible and agile working, and also help develop the marketing side of the team and develop new business opportunities and hopefully increase market share. There is a minor budget increase in future years, but we're confident that will be offset by additional income being generated by that post. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much. Any comment? One recommendation, item 19, is that agreed? 20, established accountancy services establishment. Councillor Ramsdale.
Thank you, Leader. The report recommends to Council that approval be given to the deletion of the post of Principal Accountant, post BD05, following the retirement of the part-time post holder, and created by the post of an accountancy assistant full-time within the accountancy team. That the costs are about neutral on that change. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, colleagues. Item number 20, is that agreed? 21, the property matter, the easement of access at Acres Platt, Cranley. And you'll see that this is set out in exempt papers. Councillor Tom Martin, anything to say?
Very little to add beyond what's in the report, but as the council well knows, we have many parcels of land, and this is simply a request for access over it, and who knows, there may be more to follow along that stretch.
Thank you very much. Members, you'll see that set out in your papers and all exempt on page 235. Was one recommendation, is that agreed? Item 22, we're asking for approval to set up 2 special interest groups, one to deal with health matters, as there seems to be a number of issues raising their heads at the moment, and the other to re-establish, and it's re-establish the health as well, but to re-establish the Constitution SIG, and we'll carry out the annual review, and we'll look at calling in, but it can look at any matters, the health, the Constitution SIG, because it will do the annual review, so any matter that needs to be reviewed. So 2 SIGs we're asking for there. Are they agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. The calendar for meetings in 2016-17 is set out on page 237-238. Are they agreed? Agreed. Item 24 is the appointment of independent persons. This is something that is required under the law, and we need under Localism Act 2011 to appoint at least one independent person to support the process. And you'll see that we're in a consortium with Guildford, Spelthorne and Mole Valley, so that we have people. 2 are up for reappointment and 1 is a new person. Is that agreed? Agreed. Executive Director's actions.
Non-leader this month. Thank you.
Thank you. I now move that, pursuant to Procedure Rule 20 and in accordance with Section 100A brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the present public excluded from the meeting during consideration of the items listed on the grounds shown. Is that agreed?